Question 1. The audit findings indicate that a learner driver in Ontario, despite demonstrating proficiency in basic driving maneuvers, may have a limited understanding of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario concerning the rules of the road. Which of the following actions best addresses this finding and ensures the learner is prepared for responsible driving? Option A. Provide the learner with a copy of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario and instruct them to read it independently before their next lesson. Option B. Inform the learner that their driving ability is the primary focus and that detailed legal knowledge is secondary to passing the driving test. Option C. Conduct a targeted review session with the learner, focusing on specific sections of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario relevant to common driving scenarios and assessing their comprehension through practical examples and discussion. Option D. Assume the learner's practical driving skills imply a sufficient understanding of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario and proceed with standard lesson plans. Correct answer is C. Conduct a targeted review session with the learner, focusing on specific sections of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario relevant to common driving scenarios and assessing their comprehension through practical examples and discussion. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential gap in the understanding and application of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario concerning the safe operation of a motor vehicle. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driving instructor to assess not just the technical ability of the learner driver, but also their comprehension of the legal framework governing road use. Misinterpreting or inadequately addressing these legal requirements can lead to unsafe driving practices and potential contraventions of the law, impacting both the learner and public safety. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the learner's understanding of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, specifically focusing on the rules of the road and the responsibilities of a driver. This includes clarifying any ambiguities the learner may have regarding speed limits, right-of-way, signaling, and the consequences of non-compliance. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the audit finding by ensuring the learner driver is not only skilled, but also legally informed and responsible, aligning with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's mandate for safe and competent drivers. It prioritizes education and adherence to provincial legislation, which is a core ethical and regulatory obligation for driving instructors. An incorrect approach would be to assume the learner's understanding of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario is sufficient based on their ability to perform basic driving maneuvers. This fails to acknowledge that practical driving skill does not automatically equate to legal knowledge. It also represents an ethical failure to adequately prepare the learner for all aspects of responsible driving and a regulatory failure to ensure compliance with provincial statutes. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit finding as a minor technicality, focusing solely on passing the driving test. This demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and a disregard for the importance of legal compliance in road safety. Prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, potentially putting the learner and others at risk by not instilling a fundamental respect for traffic laws. A third incorrect approach would be to provide a superficial overview of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario without actively assessing the learner's comprehension or addressing specific areas of confusion. This approach is insufficient as it does not guarantee understanding and therefore does not rectify the identified gap in knowledge. It is a missed opportunity to reinforce critical legal requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes learner competency in both practical skills and legal understanding. This involves active listening to learner questions, utilizing clear and accessible explanations of relevant legislation, and employing assessment methods that verify comprehension, not just rote memorization. When audit findings or learner behavior suggest a knowledge gap, the professional's duty is to address it directly and thoroughly, ensuring all aspects of safe and legal driving are covered. Question 2. The efficiency study reveals a need to expedite the driver licensing process in Exeter, considering the regulatory framework of the United Kingdom. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with the imperative of ensuring road safety and public trust? Option A. Focus solely on streamlining administrative procedures for license application and renewal with minimal changes to the actual driving assessment itself. Option B. Implement a significant reduction in the duration of the practical driving test to process more candidates daily, assuming that most applicants are already competent. Option C. Introduce automated assessment tools for key driving maneuvers, allowing for faster evaluation and reducing the reliance on human examiners. Option D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of proposed efficiency measures on the quality and safety outcomes of the driving test, consulting with relevant stakeholders, and prioritizing adherence to the Road Traffic Act 1988. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of proposed efficiency measures on the quality and safety outcomes of the driving test, consulting with relevant stakeholders, and prioritizing adherence to the Road Traffic Act 1988. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential need to streamline the process for obtaining a driver's license in Exeter. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficiency with the paramount importance of ensuring road safety and public trust in the licensing system. Any proposed changes must rigorously adhere to the Road Traffic Act 1988 and associated regulations governing driver licensing in the United Kingdom, as well as the ethical obligations of the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, DVLA, to protect the public. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This entails meticulously evaluating how any proposed efficiency measures might affect the thoroughness of the driving test, the accuracy of candidate assessments, and the overall integrity of the licensing process. It requires consulting with driving instructors, examiners, and road safety experts to gather diverse perspectives and identify potential unintended consequences. The justification for this approach lies in its commitment to upholding the legal framework, which mandates that licenses are only issued to individuals who demonstrate the necessary competence and fitness to drive, thereby safeguarding public safety. This aligns with the DVLA duty to ensure that all drivers meet the required standards, preventing unqualified individuals from operating vehicles on public roads. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of processing over the quality of assessment. For instance, reducing the duration of the practical driving test without a clear evidence-based rationale, demonstrating no compromise to safety standards, would be ethically and regulatorily unsound. This fails to meet the requirements of the Road Traffic Act 1988, which implicitly demands a sufficient assessment period to gauge a candidate's ability to handle various driving situations safely. Another incorrect approach would be to automate significant portions of the assessment, without ensuring the technology can accurately and reliably evaluate all aspects of driving skill and judgment, particularly in unpredictable real-world scenarios. This risks issuing licenses to individuals who may not possess the full range of competencies required for safe driving, potentially leading to increased accidents and contravening the DVLA public safety mandate. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core objectives: public safety and regulatory compliance. They must then systematically analyze proposed changes against these objectives, using data and expert opinion to predict outcomes. A structured risk assessment, followed by a pilot program if necessary, allows for the identification and mitigation of potential negative impacts before widespread implementation. This ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of safety or public confidence. Question 3. Market research demonstrates a significant demand for a new, more fuel-efficient vehicle model in Ontario, Canada. The manufacturer has conducted internal testing that suggests the vehicle will meet federal emission standards. However, to ensure full compliance with Ontario's specific environmental regulations and to proactively address potential public concerns, what is the most responsible approach for the manufacturer to take before launching the vehicle in the Ontario market? Option A. Proceed with the launch in Ontario, planning to address any potential environmental concerns raised by the Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks after the vehicle is already in the market. Option B. Conduct a detailed, independent environmental impact assessment specific to Ontario's driving conditions and regulatory framework, including projected emissions and fuel consumption data, to verify compliance with the Ontario Environmental Protection Act and its associated regulations. Option C. Commission a general environmental impact study that does not specifically consider Ontario's unique driving patterns or regulatory nuances, assuming the findings will be broadly applicable. Option D. Rely solely on the internal testing data, assuming that meeting federal emission standards is sufficient for market entry in Ontario. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed, independent environmental impact assessment specific to Ontario's driving conditions and regulatory framework, including projected emissions and fuel consumption data, to verify compliance with the Ontario Environmental Protection Act and its associated regulations. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in the automotive industry, balancing the desire to introduce new products with the need to comply with stringent environmental regulations. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the potential environmental impact of a new vehicle model before its widespread release, ensuring that all applicable regulations in Ontario, Canada, are met. This requires a thorough understanding of the Ontario Environmental Protection Act and its associated regulations concerning vehicle emissions and fuel efficiency standards. Careful judgment is required to avoid costly penalties, reputational damage, and potential harm to public health and the environment. The best professional practice involves conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that rigorously evaluates the new vehicle model's emissions profile against the current Ontario standards. This includes simulating real-world driving conditions, analyzing fuel consumption, and projecting the cumulative environmental impact of the model's anticipated sales volume. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the regulatory requirements of the Ontario Environmental Protection Act, which mandates that new vehicles introduced into the province must meet specific environmental performance benchmarks. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to environmental stewardship and public safety, an approach that relies solely on the manufacturer's internal testing data without independent verification or consideration of Ontario-specific driving conditions would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to account for potential variations in real-world performance and may not fully align with the province's specific regulatory intent. Another unacceptable approach would be to assume that compliance with federal emissions standards automatically guarantees compliance with Ontario's provincial regulations. While federal standards provide a baseline, provincial regulations can be more stringent or address specific local environmental concerns. Finally, delaying the impact assessment until after the vehicle has been released to the Ontario market would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure, exposing the company to potential legal action and recall orders. Professionals should adopt a proactive and diligent approach to environmental impact assessment. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding all applicable federal and provincial environmental regulations. 2. Designing and executing impact assessments that are comprehensive, scientifically sound, and tailored to the specific jurisdiction, in this case, Ontario. 3. Engaging with regulatory bodies early in the product development cycle if there are any uncertainties. 4. Prioritizing transparency and accuracy in reporting findings. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, reviewing a newly proposed provincial regulation that is expected to significantly alter the tax treatment of certain investment vehicles commonly held by their clients. Which of the following actions best demonstrates the advisor's commitment to their clients' best interests and compliance with Ontario's regulatory framework? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the proposed regulation's potential impact on various asset classes and client portfolios, and then communicate these potential effects to clients in a clear, objective manner, emphasizing that these are projections and not guarantees. Option B. Advise clients to immediately liquidate all holdings in the affected investment vehicles to avoid any potential negative tax consequences, without further analysis or client-specific consultation. Option C. Provide clients with a definitive list of specific new investments to purchase that will entirely mitigate the tax implications of the proposed regulation, guaranteeing positive returns. Option D. Assume the regulation will not significantly impact client portfolios and wait for clients to inquire about the changes before providing any information. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the proposed regulation's potential impact on various asset classes and client portfolios, and then communicate these potential effects to clients in a clear, objective manner, emphasizing that these are projections and not guarantees. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is tasked with assessing the potential impact of a proposed new provincial regulation on their clients' investment portfolios. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the advisor to proactively identify and communicate potential risks and opportunities to clients, demonstrating a commitment to their best interests and upholding their fiduciary duty. The advisor must navigate the complexities of regulatory change and its financial implications without causing undue alarm or providing definitive investment advice that could be misconstrued as guaranteed outcomes. The best approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the regulations' likely effects on various asset classes and client profiles. This includes identifying specific provisions of the regulation that could influence market behavior, investment returns, or client suitability. The advisor should then develop a clear, concise communication strategy to inform clients about these potential impacts, emphasizing that these are projections and not guarantees. This approach aligns with the regulatory requirements of the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) and the ethical standards expected of registered financial advisors, which mandate acting with integrity, diligence, and in the best interests of clients. It also reflects the principles of fair dealing and suitability, ensuring clients are adequately informed to make their own decisions. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the regulation, assuming it will have no significant impact or that clients will discover the implications themselves. This failure to proactively assess and communicate potential risks violates the advisor's duty of care and diligence, potentially exposing clients to unforeseen losses and breaching OSC regulations regarding client disclosure and fair treatment. Another incorrect approach would be to overstate the potential negative impacts of the regulation, creating unnecessary fear and potentially pressuring clients into making hasty, ill-advised investment decisions. This would contravene ethical guidelines on professional conduct and could be seen as a breach of the advisor's duty to provide objective and balanced advice. Finally, providing specific, guaranteed investment recommendations based solely on the anticipated effects of the regulation, without considering individual client circumstances and risk tolerance, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it bypasses the fundamental principle of suitability. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes client well-being and regulatory compliance. This involves staying abreast of legislative and regulatory changes, conducting thorough impact assessments, communicating potential effects transparently and objectively, and always adhering to the principles of suitability and best interests of the client. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates that clients sometimes express strong preferences for specific investment strategies, even if those strategies appear to carry higher risks. In Ontario, Canada, how should a financial advisor best respond when a client, who has expressed a desire for rapid capital growth, insists on investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative new venture fund, despite the advisor's initial assessment suggesting it may not be suitable? Option A. Focus exclusively on the potential for high returns from the speculative fund, downplaying the associated risks to encourage the client to proceed with the investment. Option B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, and then discuss the speculative fund's risks and potential returns in detail, explaining why it may not be suitable while exploring alternative suitable options that align with their growth aspirations. Option C. Immediately agree to the client's request to invest in the speculative fund to satisfy their immediate desire for rapid growth, as client satisfaction is paramount. Option D. Firmly refuse the client's request to invest in the speculative fund and advise them to seek advice elsewhere if they are unwilling to follow the advisor's recommendations. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, and then discuss the speculative fund's risks and potential returns in detail, explaining why it may not be suitable while exploring alternative suitable options that align with their growth aspirations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the regulatory obligations of a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada. The advisor must ensure that any advice provided is suitable for the client's circumstances and aligns with the regulatory framework governing financial advice in Ontario, specifically the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) rules and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada (IIROC) regulations. The core of the challenge lies in avoiding undue influence or pressure to act against the client's best interests or the advisor's professional judgment. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives before recommending any course of action, even if the client expresses a strong preference. This aligns with the fundamental principles of client-centric advice mandated by OSC Rule 31-505, registration requirements, registration exemptions and reporting obligations, and EROC Dealer Member Rule 2, conduct of members. Specifically, advisors have a duty to act honestly, in good faith, and in the best interests of the client, and to deal fairly, prudently, and professionally with clients. This requires understanding the client's needs and recommending investments that are suitable. The advisor must also consider the client's stated desire for a quick return, but this must be weighed against the inherent risks and the client's overall financial well-being. An approach that immediately agrees to the client's request without further investigation is professionally unacceptable. This would violate the advisor's duty of care and suitability obligations, potentially exposing the client to excessive risk and failing to meet their actual financial needs. Prioritizes a perceived short-term client desire over a comprehensive and responsible assessment, which is a direct contravention of regulatory expectations. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without understanding the underlying motivation or exploring alternatives. While the advisor must ensure suitability, a complete refusal without discussion can damage the client relationship and may not address the client's underlying financial concerns. It fails to engage in a constructive dialogue to find a suitable solution. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the potential for high returns without adequately discussing the associated risks and the client's capacity to absorb potential losses is also professionally flawed. This would be a misrepresentation of the investment opportunity and a failure to provide balanced and informed advice, again, contravening the principles of suitability and fair dealing. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with active listening to understand the client's stated desires and underlying needs. This should be followed by a comprehensive fact-finding process to gather all relevant financial information. Next, the advisor must analyze this information against regulatory requirements for suitability and ethical obligations. Finally, the advisor should present a range of suitable options, clearly explaining the risks and benefits of each, and collaboratively determine the best course of action with the client. Question 6. The assessment process reveals a candidate for the Exeter driver's test is visibly distressed and exhibiting significant signs of anxiety, which appears to be affecting their ability to concentrate on basic driving tasks. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Adjust the difficulty of the test maneuvers to accommodate the candidate's anxiety, allowing for a less stringent evaluation. Option B. Immediately terminate the test due to the candidate's evident anxiety, deeming them unfit to continue. Option C. Proceed with the test as normal, without making specific observations about the anxiety, and mark the test based on the observed performance regardless of its cause. Option D. Continue the test, closely observing the candidate's ability to maintain safe control of the vehicle and react appropriately to road conditions, while noting the impact of anxiety on their performance. The correct answer is D. Continue the test, closely observing the candidate's ability to maintain safe control of the vehicle and react appropriately to road conditions, while noting the impact of anxiety on their performance. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a candidate for the Exeter driver's test exhibits signs of significant anxiety, impacting their ability to perform basic maneuvers. The situation is professionally challenging because the examiner must balance the paramount duty of ensuring public safety with the need to conduct a fair and objective assessment. The examiner's judgment is critical in determining whether the candidate's performance is a temporary manifestation of nerves or indicative of a fundamental lack of driving competence. The best approach involves a careful, real-time assessment of the candidate's ability to control the vehicle safely, even under pressure. This includes observing their reactions to standard driving situations, their understanding of road rules, and their capacity to respond appropriately to unexpected events. The examiner should focus on whether the candidate can demonstrate a consistent level of safe driving, acknowledging that some nervousness is normal. If the candidate can still maintain control, follow instructions, and react safely to traffic, the test should proceed, with the examiner making detailed notes of the observed anxiety and its impact on performance. This aligns with the core principle of the Exeter driver's test, which is to assess a candidate's ability to drive safely and competently in typical road conditions, while also adhering to the ethical obligation to avoid putting other road users at risk. An incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the test solely based on visible signs of anxiety, without first assessing if the candidate can still perform the required maneuvers safely. This fails to acknowledge that many drivers experience nerves during their test and can still pass if they demonstrate competence. Another incorrect approach is to lower the standard of assessment to accommodate the anxiety, for example, by overlooking minor errors that would normally lead to failure. This compromises the integrity of the test and the safety of the public, as it does not accurately reflect the candidate's true driving ability. Finally, continuing the test without making any specific observations or adjustments to account for the anxiety, and simply marking the test as failed due to poor performance without considering the underlying cause, would also be professionally unacceptable. This lacks the nuanced judgment required to differentiate between test nerves and genuine incompetence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, fairness, and adherence to established testing standards. This involves observing behavior, assessing performance against objective criteria, and making a reasoned judgment based on the totality of the evidence, rather than on a single factor like visible nervousness. Question 7. Analysis of the need for driver information in Ontario for a legitimate business purpose. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant method to obtain a driver's license number and associated details from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation? Option A. Contact a personal acquaintance working within the Ministry of Transportation and ask them to retrieve the information informally. Option B. Attempt to gain unauthorized access to the Ministry of Transportation's internal database to locate the driver's license number. Option C. Directly ask the individual for their driver's license number and other personal details without explicitly outlining the purpose or obtaining explicit consent. Option D. Submit a formal written request to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, clearly stating the legal basis and purpose for requiring the information and adhering to their established procedures for information disclosure. The correct answer is D. Submit a formal written request to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, clearly stating the legal basis and purpose for requiring the information, and adhering to their established procedures for information disclosure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict privacy regulations governing driver data in Ontario. The temptation to bypass formal channels for expediency must be resisted, as unauthorized access or disclosure of personal information carries significant legal and ethical consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions align with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPTA, which govern the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves formally requesting the information through the established channels outlined by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. This approach prioritizes compliance with privacy laws by ensuring that the request is legitimate, documented, and processed by authorized personnel. It upholds the principle of lawful access to information, respecting the privacy rights of individuals as mandated by Ontario legislation. This method ensures that any disclosure of information is done with proper authorization and for a legally permissible purpose. Incorrect approaches analysis. Seeking the information directly from a contact within the Ministry of Transportation without a formal documented request, even if the contact is willing to share, constitutes a breach of privacy regulations. This bypasses the established safeguards designed to protect personal information and could lead to unauthorized disclosure. It fails to adhere to the principles of accountability and lawful access. Attempting to access the ministry's internal database without proper authorization, even with the intention of quickly finding the information, is illegal and unethical. This constitutes a serious breach of data security and privacy laws, potentially leading to severe penalties for both the individual and the organization. Asking the individual directly for their driver's license number and other identifying details, without clearly explaining the purpose and obtaining their informed consent, is also problematic. While direct communication is often preferred, it must be conducted within the bounds of privacy legislation, which requires transparency and consent for the collection and use of personal information. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal and regulatory requirements governing the information sought, in this case, Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and PIPTA. 2. Determining the authorized and lawful methods for obtaining such information. 3. If direct access is not permissible, exploring formal request procedures. 4. Ensuring transparency and obtaining consent when interacting with individuals regarding their personal information. 5. Documenting all requests and actions taken. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel or the relevant regulatory body is essential. Question 8. The review process indicates that a financial advisor in Ontario, who has been providing investment advice to a long-term client, received a high-value gift from that client shortly after recommending a significant portfolio adjustment. The advisor is unsure if accepting the gift is permissible under Ontario's financial services regulations and firm policies. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Accept the gift and consider it a personal benefit that can be enjoyed without further disclosure. Option B. Accept the gift, assuming it is a personal gesture of gratitude, and continue with the client relationship as usual. Option C. Immediately report the gift to the firm's compliance department and seek guidance on its acceptance and any potential conflicts of interest. Option D. Accept the gift, but discreetly inform the client that it will not influence future advice. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the gift to the firm's compliance department and seek guidance on its acceptance and any potential conflicts of interest. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest and a breach of professional conduct regarding the handling of client information and the acceptance of gifts. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the individual to navigate the delicate balance between maintaining professional relationships and adhering strictly to regulatory requirements and ethical standards designed to protect client interests and the integrity of the financial advisory profession. The potential for personal gain to influence professional judgment is a significant concern. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the gift to the firm's compliance department and seeking guidance on whether acceptance is permissible under the firm's policies and the regulatory framework of Ontario. This aligns with the principles of integrity and acting in the best interests of clients, as mandated by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, FSRAO, guidelines, and the ethical codes of conduct for financial advisors in Ontario. Promptly reporting such situations demonstrates a commitment to transparency and allows the firm to assess any potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with all applicable regulations, thereby safeguarding both the client and the advisor. An incorrect approach would be to accept the gift without any disclosure, assuming it is a minor token of appreciation. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even small gifts to create perceived or actual conflicts of interest, which is a direct contravention of the FSRAO expectations for ethical conduct and the duty to avoid situations that could compromise professional judgment. Another incorrect approach would be to accept the gift and then attempt to downplay its significance to the client or the firm. This demonstrates a lack of transparency and an attempt to circumvent established compliance procedures, which erodes trust and violates the ethical obligation to be forthright in all professional dealings. Finally, accepting the gift and immediately using it to influence future recommendations to the client is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. This directly demonstrates that personal gain is influencing professional advice, undermining the fiduciary duty owed to the client and violating core principles of fair dealing and client-centric advice, as enforced by FSRAO. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, compliance, and the client's best interests. This involves a continuous assessment of potential conflicts of interest, a thorough understanding of firm policies and regulatory requirements, and a commitment to seeking guidance from compliance departments when in doubt. The default position should always be to err on the side of caution and disclosure. Question 9. Performance analysis shows a concerning rise in Exeter drivers failing to yield to pedestrians at marked crosswalks. Considering the Exeter Road Safety Charter's commitment to proactive safety measures and driver education, what is the most appropriate initial response to address this trend? Option A. Deploy additional police officers to ticket drivers at all marked crosswalks during peak hours. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of incident data to identify specific patterns and contributing factors. Then develop targeted driver education and awareness campaigns focused on crosswalk safety. Option C. Classify the increase in incidents as a temporary statistical fluctuation and await further data before taking action. Option D. Immediately increase fines for all drivers observed near marked crosswalks to serve as a strong deterrent. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed review of incident data to identify specific patterns and contributing factors. Then develop targeted driver education and awareness campaigns focused on crosswalk safety. Explanation. Performance analysis shows a significant increase in reported incidents involving Exeter drivers failing to yield to pedestrians at marked crosswalks. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate and effective intervention to prevent further harm, balancing the need for swift action with the principles of fairness and due process for drivers. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes and implement appropriate remedial measures without unduly penalizing individuals. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the incident data to identify patterns and contributing factors, followed by targeted driver education and awareness campaigns, specifically addressing the identified issues at crosswalks. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the observed performance gap through evidence-based interventions. It aligns with the Exeter Road Safety Charter's emphasis on proactive measures and continuous improvement in driver behavior. By focusing on education and awareness, it promotes a culture of safety and responsibility among drivers, aiming to prevent future incidents rather than solely relying on punitive measures. This proactive and educational strategy is ethically sound as it prioritizes public safety and seeks to improve driver competency. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a blanket increase in fines for all drivers caught near crosswalks without further investigation. This fails to address the underlying reasons for the increased incidents and could unfairly penalize drivers who are not exhibiting problematic behavior. It also neglects the educational component crucial for long-term behavioral change, potentially leading to resentment and a lack of genuine commitment to safety. This approach is ethically questionable as it relies on a punitive measure without understanding the problem's context. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on increased police presence and ticketing at crosswalks. While this might offer a short-term deterrent, it does not address the knowledge gaps or attitudinal issues that may be contributing to the problem. It is a reactive measure that does not foster a proactive safety culture. Ethically, this approach prioritizes enforcement over education and rehabilitation, which is less effective in achieving sustainable safety improvements. A final incorrect approach would be to dismiss the data as statistical anomalies without further investigation. This demonstrates a failure to acknowledge performance issues and a lack of commitment to the Exeter Road Safety Charter's objectives. It is professionally irresponsible to ignore evidence of increased risk to the public and fails to uphold the ethical duty to ensure public safety. Professionals should adopt a data-driven decision-making process. This involves 1. Acknowledging and analyzing performance data to identify specific issues. 2. Investigating the root causes of the identified problems. 3. Developing targeted interventions that are both effective and ethically sound, prioritizing education and prevention where appropriate. 4. Continuously monitoring the impact of interventions and adapting strategies as needed. Question 10. Operational review demonstrates that the Exeter Driving School in Ontario is considering expanding its fleet by 50% over the next fiscal year. To ensure financial viability and compliance with Ontario's Ministry of Transportation, MTO, regulations for driver training programs, the school needs to project its financial performance under various operational scenarios. If the school currently operates with 10 vehicles, and each vehicle is projected to generate an average monthly revenue of $4,000 based on student fees, while monthly fixed operating costs, insurance, facility administration, are $15,000 and variable costs per vehicle, fuel, maintenance, instructor wages, are $1,500. What would be the projected monthly profit if the fleet expands to 15 vehicles, assuming all other revenue and variable cost per vehicle figures remain constant? Option A. The projected monthly profit would be $25,500. Option B. The projected monthly profit would be $20,000. Option C. The projected monthly profit would be $15,000. Option D. The projected monthly profit would be $30,000. Correct answer is A. The projected monthly profit would be $25,500. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to financial forecasting and its impact on operational planning for a driving school in Ontario, Canada. The core difficulty lies in accurately projecting future revenue and expenses, which directly influences the school's ability to maintain its fleet, hire instructors, and comply with provincial regulations for driver training programs. Miscalculations can lead to underfunding, operational disruptions, and potential noncompliance with Ontario's Ministry of Transportation (MTO) standards for driver education providers. Careful judgment is required to balance optimistic growth projections with realistic operational costs and regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a scenario-based financial projection that incorporates a sensitivity analysis to assess the impact of varying assumptions on key financial metrics. This approach, which aligns with sound financial management principles and the need for robust operational planning under Ontario's regulatory framework for driver training, involves calculating the break-even point for different fleet sizes and student enrollment numbers. For instance, if the school aims to operate with 10 vehicles and anticipates an average of 20 students per vehicle per month, with each student paying $500, projected monthly revenue would be /10 vehicles times 20 text student vehicle times $500 text student equals $100,000. Simultaneously estimating fixed costs, e.g., insurance, facility rent, administrative salaries, and variable costs, e.g., fuel maintenance per vehicle, instructor wages per student, is crucial. A sensitivity analysis would then explore scenarios where student enrollment is 10% lower or fuel costs are 15% higher, recalculating the break-even point and profitability under these conditions. This provides a realistic range of financial outcomes and informs proactive decision-making to ensure the school remains financially viable and compliant with MTO requirements for operational stability. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a single, optimistic revenue projection without considering potential cost overruns or lower than expected student enrollment. This fails to account for the inherent uncertainties in business operations and the specific market dynamics of driver training in Ontario. It neglects the regulatory expectation for driver training schools to maintain a stable and reliable service, which is undermined by a lack of financial contingency planning. Another incorrect approach would be to focus only on minimizing immediate expenses without a corresponding assessment of their impact on service quality or regulatory compliance. For example, drastically cutting back on vehicle maintenance to save costs could lead to breakdowns, impacting student scheduling and potentially violating MTO safety standards. This approach prioritizes short-term savings over long-term operational integrity and regulatory adherence. A further incorrect approach would be to base financial projections solely on historical data without adjusting for current market conditions, such as increased insurance premiums for commercial vehicles or changes in fuel prices, which are significant cost drivers for a driving school operating in Ontario. This static approach ignores the dynamic nature of operational costs and the need for adaptive financial planning to meet ongoing regulatory obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured approach to financial forecasting that emphasizes scenario planning and risk assessment. This involves identifying key variables that influence revenue and expenses, quantifying their potential impact, and developing contingency plans. For a driving school in Ontario, this means understanding the MTO's requirements for fleet maintenance, instructor qualifications, and student safety, and ensuring that financial projections support these operational necessities. A robust financial model should allow for adjustments based on real-time data and market fluctuations, enabling proactive management and ensuring sustained compliance with provincial regulations. Question 11. Investigation of a candidate's performance during a practical driving assessment in Exeter reveals a situation where the candidate, feeling a slight uncertainty about the upcoming turn, considers taking a route they are more familiar with, which they believe is a quicker way to reach the next checkpoint. What is the most appropriate course of action for the candidate in this scenario, according to the principles of the Exeter driver's test? Option A. Ask the examiner if a slight detour is permissible to avoid a perceived traffic jam. Option B. Strictly follow the examiner's instructed route, even if it feels less familiar or potentially longer. Option C. Take a familiar shortcut that is not part of the designated route, believing it to be more efficient. Option D. Briefly stop at a convenience store to purchase a drink, even if it is on the way. The correct answer is B. Strictly follow the examiner's instructed route, even if it feels less familiar or potentially longer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with the overarching legal and safety requirements of the Exeter driver's test regulations. The temptation to deviate from the prescribed route for a perceived shortcut or personal errand, especially when feeling pressured or uncertain, is a common pitfall. Careful judgment is required to prioritize adherence to the test parameters over personal impulses, recognizing that the test is designed to assess competence and adherence to rules, not just the ability to reach a destination. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the designated test route as instructed by the examiner. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the core objective of the Exeter driver's test, which is to assess a candidate's ability to follow directions, navigate safely within a controlled environment, and demonstrate knowledge of road rules and safe driving practices as defined by the test parameters. Deviating from the route, even for a seemingly minor reason, constitutes a failure to comply with the test conditions and demonstrates a lack of attentiveness and adherence to instructions, which are fundamental assessment criteria. This upholds the integrity of the testing process and ensures that the assessment accurately reflects the candidate's ability to perform under test conditions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves taking a familiar shortcut that is not part of the designated route, believing it to be more efficient. This is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a disregard for the examiner's instructions and the established test protocol. The Exeter driver's test route is specifically designed to evaluate a range of driving skills in various traffic conditions and road layouts. Circumventing this route, regardless of perceived efficiency, undermines the assessment's validity and suggests an unwillingness to follow directions, a critical aspect of safe driving and test compliance. Another incorrect approach is to briefly stop at a convenience store to purchase a drink, even if it is on the way. This is professionally unacceptable, as it represents an unauthorized stop and a deviation from the continuous assessment of driving performance. The test is a timed evaluation of driving skills, and any unscheduled stop, however brief, interrupts the flow of the assessment and introduces an element not accounted for in the test's design. It also implies a lack of focus on the primary task of completing the driving test. A third incorrect approach is to ask the examiner if a slight detour is permissible to avoid a perceived traffic jam. While seemingly proactive, this is professionally unacceptable because it shifts the responsibility of route management to the examiner in a way that is outside the standard test procedure. The examiner's role is to assess the candidate's ability to navigate the given route, including dealing with expected traffic conditions. Asking for a detour suggests a lack of confidence in one's ability to handle the test conditions as presented, and can be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate the test environment, which is contrary to the principles of a fair and objective assessment. Professional reasoning. Professionals undertaking a driving test should adopt a mindset of strict adherence to instructions and protocols. The decision-making process should prioritize understanding and fulfilling the explicit requirements of the assessment. This involves actively listening to and remembering directions, focusing on the task at hand, and resisting the urge to make personal judgments or deviations that are not sanctioned by the test administrator. When faced with uncertainty, the professional approach is to seek clarification from the examiner within the bounds of the test procedure, rather than making unilateral decisions that could compromise the integrity of the assessment. The ultimate goal is to demonstrate competence and adherence to established standards. Question 12. Comparative studies suggest that when assessing the potential impacts of a proposed new bypass around Exeter, Devon, what is the most responsible and legally compliant approach for the project's planning team? Option A. Treat local resident objections primarily as resistance to change, focusing the assessment on technical engineering aspects and assuming that any environmental concerns raised by the public are secondary to the project's primary objectives. Option B. Prioritize the economic benefits of reduced traffic congestion and improved accessibility, while acknowledging potential environmental issues, but focusing mitigation efforts primarily on the most obvious and easily addressed concerns. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment (IA) that systematically identifies, quantifies, and proposes detailed mitigation strategies for all potential environmental, social, and economic impacts, engaging with local communities and regulatory bodies throughout the process. Option D. Utilize a standardized, generic impact assessment template applicable to similar road projects across the UK, applying its findings directly to the Exeter context without extensive site-specific data collection or in-depth local consultation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment (IA) that systematically identifies, quantifies, and proposes detailed mitigation strategies for all potential environmental, social, and economic impacts, engaging with local communities and regulatory bodies throughout the process. Explanation. Comparative studies suggest that the impact assessment of new road infrastructure projects in Exeter, Devon, requires a nuanced understanding of potential environmental and community effects. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands balancing the economic and social benefits of improved transport links against potential negative consequences, such as increased noise pollution, habitat fragmentation, and disruption to local businesses during construction. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment is comprehensive, objective, and adheres to the principles of sustainable development as outlined in UK planning policy and environmental regulations. The best professional practice involves a thorough, evidence-based impact assessment that proactively identifies, quantifies, and proposes mitigation measures for all foreseeable negative impacts. This approach prioritizes the collection of robust data, consultation with affected stakeholders, and the integration of findings into the project design to minimize harm. Specifically, it aligns with the Environmental Impact Assessment (IA) regulations in the UK, which mandate a systematic process for evaluating the likely environmental effects of a proposed development. This includes considering direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts, and ensuring that mitigation strategies are practical and effective, thereby fulfilling the duty of care to protect the environment and local communities. An approach that focuses solely on the economic benefits of the project, while acknowledging potential environmental concerns but without detailed mitigation planning, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the comprehensive requirements of EIA regulations, which necessitate a proactive and detailed assessment of negative impacts and the development of concrete mitigation strategies. It risks overlooking significant environmental damage or community disruption, leading to potential legal challenges and reputational damage. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to dismiss community concerns as mere opposition without objective evaluation. This disregards the importance of public engagement and the potential for local knowledge to identify impacts not apparent through technical assessments alone. It violates ethical principles of transparency and community consultation, which are integral to responsible project development. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated environmental data or generic impact models without specific consideration for the unique ecological and social context of Exeter is also flawed. This lack of specificity can lead to inaccurate assessments and ineffective mitigation, failing to address the particular vulnerabilities of the local environment and community. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, e.g., EIA regulations. This should be followed by a systematic process of impact identification, data collection, stakeholder consultation, and the development of a robust mitigation and monitoring plan. The process should be iterative, allowing for adjustments based on new information or feedback, and should always prioritize the principles of environmental protection and sustainable development. Question 13. The investigation demonstrates that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, has been presented with an investment opportunity by a client that is complex and falls outside the advisor's typical area of expertise. The client is enthusiastic about the potential returns. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor to take in assessing this situation? Option A. Decline to discuss the investment further, as it is outside the advisor's area of expertise, and advise the client to seek advice elsewhere without further engagement. Option B. Proceed with recommending the investment if the client expresses strong interest, assuming the client understands the risks involved. Option C. Recommend the investment based on the client's enthusiasm, focusing primarily on the potential for high returns as the client's main objective. Option D. Thoroughly assess the investment's impact on the client's overall financial plan and risk tolerance, seeking further information or specialist advice if the investment is outside the advisor's expertise. Correct answer is D. Thoroughly assess the investment's impact on the client's overall financial plan and risk tolerance, seeking further information or specialist advice if the investment is outside the advisor's expertise. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is approached by a client with a complex, potentially high-risk investment proposal that falls outside the advisor's usual expertise. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the advisor to balance their duty to their client with their own professional competence and regulatory obligations. The advisor must exercise careful judgment to ensure they are acting in the client's best interest while adhering to the strict standards set by the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada (IROC). The best professional approach involves the advisor conducting a thorough impact assessment of the proposed investment on the client's overall financial plan and risk tolerance. This includes understanding the investment's objectives, risks, and potential returns, and critically evaluating whether it aligns with the client's stated goals and capacity for loss. Crucially, if the investment falls outside the advisor's expertise, the advisor must proactively seek additional information, potentially consult with specialists, or recommend the client seek independent advice. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the client's best interests, upholds the advisor's duty of care, and adheres to the OSC's client-focused conduct rules and IROC suitability requirements, which mandate that advisors only recommend investments that are suitable for their clients based on their individual circumstances and risk profile. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment recommendation without fully understanding its implications or the advisor's own limitations. This could involve the advisor feeling pressured to accommodate the client's request without adequate due diligence, or assuming the investment is suitable simply because the client expressed interest. Such actions would violate the advisor's duty to act with integrity and in the client's best interest, and would contravene OSC and IROC regulations that require thorough suitability assessments and prohibit advisors from recommending products they do not fully understand or that are not appropriate for the client. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without exploring the underlying reasons for their interest or offering alternative, suitable solutions. This demonstrates a lack of client engagement and could lead to the client seeking advice from less scrupulous sources, potentially exposing them to greater risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of client needs and objectives. This is followed by a comprehensive assessment of any proposed investment suitability, considering its alignment with the client's risk tolerance, financial situation, and investment goals. When faced with unfamiliar or complex investment proposals, the framework dictates a proactive approach to information gathering, and if necessary, seeking expert consultation or advising the client to do so. This ensures that all recommendations are well-informed, ethical, and compliant with regulatory requirements. Question 14. Assessment of the appropriate response when a driver is found disoriented and distressed at the scene of a minor traffic incident in Ontario, Canada, and requires immediate assistance, but is hesitant to share personal identification details. Option A. Share the driver's personal information with bystanders who are offering help, explaining that it is necessary to gather information quickly. Option B. Immediately access the driver's personal identification information from their vehicle or wallet to expedite the process of providing assistance and filing a report, as the situation is an emergency. Option C. Clearly explain to the driver why their information is needed for their safety and to facilitate assistance. Seek their explicit consent to access specific details, and only access what is strictly necessary for immediate care and reporting. Option D. Refuse to provide any assistance until the driver provides all requested personal identification details in writing, to ensure full compliance with privacy regulations. The correct answer is C. Clearly explain to the driver why their information is needed for their safety and to facilitate assistance. Seek their explicit consent to access specific details, and only access what is strictly necessary for immediate care and reporting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict data privacy regulations governing the handling of personal information in Ontario, Canada. The driver's immediate distress and the urgency of the situation can create pressure to bypass standard procedures, but doing so carries significant legal and ethical risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is both effective in addressing the immediate situation and compliant with the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, and Ontario's provincial privacy legislation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured approach that prioritizes obtaining consent and minimizing data collection while still addressing the immediate need. This approach involves clearly explaining to the individual why their information is needed, what specific information will be accessed, and for what purpose. It also includes obtaining their explicit consent before accessing any personal details, even in an emergency. If consent cannot be obtained due to the individual's incapacitation, the professional must then assess if the collection of information is reasonably necessary for the safety and security of the individual, and if it aligns with the principles of necessity and proportionality under PIPEDA and Ontario's privacy laws. This ensures that the collection of personal information is justified, transparent, and respects the individual's privacy rights to the greatest extent possible under the circumstances. Incorrect approach is analysis. Accessing the driver's personal information without any attempt to obtain consent or clearly explain the purpose of the access is a direct violation of PIPEDA and Ontario privacy laws. These regulations mandate that personal information should only be collected with consent, and for purposes that a reasonable person would consider appropriate. Failing to inform the individual or seek their permission, even in a stressful situation, demonstrates a disregard for their privacy rights and could lead to legal repercussions. Sharing the driver's personal information with other individuals not directly involved in the immediate response or without a clear, justifiable need constitutes a breach of confidentiality and privacy. This action goes beyond the scope of what is reasonably necessary for the situation and violates the principles of accountability and purpose limitation under privacy legislation. Delaying assistance to first obtain a formal written consent form, especially when the individual is in distress or incapacitated, is an unreasonable and potentially harmful approach. While consent is crucial, the law recognizes exceptions for emergencies where obtaining consent is not feasible, and the action taken is for the individual's well-being. Prioritizing bureaucratic procedure over immediate safety and well-being is ethically unsound and may not align with the spirit of privacy legislation in emergency contexts. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Ontario dealing with situations involving personal information must adopt a framework that prioritizes privacy by design and default. This involves understanding the applicable privacy legislation, PIPEDA, and provincial laws, conducting a risk assessment for any proposed collection or use of personal information, and always seeking the least intrusive method to achieve a legitimate objective. In emergency situations, the framework requires a careful balance between the duty of care and privacy obligations, focusing on necessity, proportionality, and obtaining consent whenever possible, or justifying the collection and use of information in its absence based on clear legal and ethical grounds. Question 15. Compliance review shows that a financial advisor in Ontario has a client who is insistent on investing a significant portion of their retirement savings into a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that carries substantial risk and has a history of extreme volatility. The advisor has conducted preliminary research and believes this investment is not suitable for the client's stated retirement goals and risk tolerance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor to take? Option A. Immediately execute the client's requested investment to maintain client satisfaction and avoid potential conflict. Option B. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of the proposed investment, clearly outlining the potential negative consequences for the client's retirement goals and risk tolerance, and present alternative more suitable investment options. Option C. Proceed with the investment, focusing on the potential commission earnings, while advising the client to be prepared for potential losses. Option D. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled due to the advisor's personal opinion on the investment's risk. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of the proposed investment, clearly outlining the potential negative consequences for the client's retirement goals and risk tolerance, and present alternative, more suitable investment options. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the potential for that preference to lead to negative outcomes, impacting the client's financial well-being and potentially exposing the advisor to regulatory scrutiny. The advisor must navigate this by prioritizing client best interests and adhering to regulatory obligations, even when it means disagreeing with the client's initial inclination. Careful judgment is required to balance client autonomy with professional responsibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes the client's long-term financial health and regulatory compliance. This approach necessitates a detailed analysis of the proposed investment suitability, considering the client's risk tolerance, financial goals, and time horizon. It requires the advisor to clearly articulate the potential negative impacts of the investment, supported by objective data and regulatory guidance, and to present alternative, more suitable options. This aligns with the principles of client best interest and suitability, as mandated by financial regulatory bodies in Ontario, which require advisors to act in a manner that is informed, prudent, and in the client's best interest, avoiding recommendations that could lead to undue risk or financial detriment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately proceeding with the client's request without further investigation. This fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty and regulatory obligation to ensure investments are suitable. It bypasses the critical impact assessment, potentially exposing the client to significant financial loss and the advisor to disciplinary action for failing to exercise due diligence. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand their reasoning or providing a reasoned explanation. This can damage the client relationship and may overlook valid, albeit perhaps misinformed, client motivations. While the advisor has a duty to guide, a complete dismissal without dialogue is unprofessional and fails to educate the client. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the potential for commission or fees associated with the proposed investment, rather than its suitability for the client. This prioritizes the advisor's personal gain over the client's best interests, which is a direct violation of ethical standards and regulatory requirements in Ontario concerning conflicts of interest and client suitability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's objectives and then conducting a comprehensive suitability assessment. This involves gathering all relevant client information, researching potential investments thoroughly, and evaluating them against the client's profile and regulatory standards. When a client's preference conflicts with suitability, the professional must engage in open communication, explain the rationale for their concerns with supporting evidence, and propose suitable alternatives. The ultimate decision should always be guided by the client's best interests and adherence to all applicable regulations. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that a financial advisory firm in London is considering launching an aggressive new marketing campaign aimed at significantly increasing its client base. What is the most prudent and compliant approach for the firm to take before implementing this campaign? Option A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed marketing campaign on the firm's resources, compliance frameworks, and risk appetite. Option B. Proceed with the marketing campaign immediately, assuming that increased business volume will be manageable with existing infrastructure. Option C. Delegate the decision to launch the campaign solely to the sales team, with minimal input from the compliance department. Option D. Prioritize the potential revenue generated by the campaign and launch it without a detailed risk assessment. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed marketing campaign on the firm's resources, compliance frameworks, and risk appetite. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firm's desire to expand its client base and the regulatory obligation to ensure that all new clients are suitable and that the firm can adequately manage the associated risks. The firm must balance commercial opportunity with its fiduciary duties and compliance requirements under the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook in the United Kingdom. Careful judgment is required to avoid regulatory breaches and protect both the firm and its clients. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a thorough impact assessment of the proposed marketing campaign on the firm's existing resources, compliance frameworks, and risk appetite. This assessment should specifically consider the capacity of the firm's compliance team to onboard and monitor a potentially larger and more diverse client base, the adequacy of current systems and controls to handle increased volume and complexity, and whether the campaign aligns with the firm's overall strategic objectives and risk tolerance as defined by its internal policies and FCA principles. This approach ensures that the firm is not only compliant, but also operationally sound and ethically positioned to serve new clients effectively, adhering to Principle 3, Management and Control, and Principle 5, Suitability, of the FCA's Principles for Businesses. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the marketing campaign without a formal impact assessment, relying solely on the assumption that increased business volume will be manageable. This fails to proactively identify potential compliance gaps, resource constraints, or increased risks, potentially leading to breaches of FCA regulations, particularly concerning adequate systems and controls, SISC rules, and client categorization. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the immediate revenue potential of the campaign over a comprehensive risk assessment. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities, potentially exposing the firm to significant reputational damage and regulatory sanctions if client onboarding or ongoing management processes are compromised due to inadequate preparation. A further incorrect approach is to delegate the decision-making solely to the sales team, without involving the compliance department in the initial planning stages. This bypasses crucial regulatory oversight and expertise, increasing the likelihood that the campaign might inadvertently target unsuitable clients or propose services that the firm is not equipped to deliver compliantly, violating the duty to act honestly, fairly, and professionally in accordance with the best interests of clients. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and internal policies. For launching any new initiative, especially one involving client acquisition, a comprehensive impact assessment should be conducted. This assessment should involve cross-departmental collaboration, particularly between business development and compliance, to identify potential risks and ensure that adequate resources, systems, and controls are in place. The decision to proceed should be contingent on the findings of this assessment, prioritizing regulatory compliance and client well-being over short-term commercial gains. Question 17. Consider a scenario where you are driving your vehicle on Highway 401 in Ontario and notice that your rear brake light has suddenly stopped working. You are some distance from your intended destination, but not immediately near a safe place to pull over. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action to take? Option A. Immediately pull over to the nearest safe location off the roadway and activate your hazard lights. Option B. Continue driving at a reduced speed, hoping to reach your destination before encountering heavy traffic or a police officer. Option C. Proceed directly to the nearest Ontario Provincial Police Detachment to report the issue. Option D. Drive directly to a friend's house or a repair shop that is still a significant distance away. The correct answer is A. Immediately pull over to the nearest safe location off the roadway and activate your hazard lights. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the driver to balance immediate personal needs with their legal and ethical obligations as a licensed driver in Ontario. The temptation to prioritize personal convenience over safety and regulatory compliance is a common pitfall. Careful judgment is required to assess the situation objectively, considering the potential risks to themselves and others, and to make a decision that aligns with the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately pulling over to a safe location off the roadway and activating hazard lights. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the immediate safety concern of a malfunctioning brake light. Section 62 of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario mandates that every vehicle on a highway must be equipped with functioning lights, including brake lights, and that drivers are responsible for ensuring their vehicle is in a safe operating condition. By pulling over and activating hazard lights, the driver is mitigating the immediate risk of being struck from behind due to the lack of a functioning brake light, and is taking proactive steps to address the mechanical issue, demonstrating responsible vehicle operation and adherence to safety principles. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to take any immediate action and continuing to drive, even at a reduced speed, is professionally unacceptable. This approach violates Section 62 of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario by operating a vehicle with a critical safety defect. It significantly increases the risk of a collision, as other drivers may not be aware of the vehicle's braking intentions, leading to potential severe consequences. Attempting to reach a specific destination before addressing the issue, such as a friend's house or a distant repair shop, is also professionally unacceptable. The driver may believe they can manage the risk. The inherent unpredictability of traffic and road conditions means that a sudden braking event could occur, leading to an accident. This approach prioritizes personal convenience over the safety of all road users and contravenes the driver's responsibility to ensure their vehicle is safe to operate at all times. Driving directly to a police station to report the issue without first ensuring the vehicle is safe to operate is not the most effective or safest immediate response. While reporting is important, the primary concern is the immediate safety hazard posed by the malfunctioning brake light. The police would likely instruct the driver to pull over to a safe location and arrange for repairs, making the initial direct drive to the station an unnecessary risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, must prioritize safety and regulatory compliance. When faced with a mechanical issue that compromises safety, the immediate priority is to mitigate risk. This involves ceasing operation in a manner that endangers others and taking steps to rectify the problem. A systematic approach involves 1. Recognizing the hazard. 2. Assessing the immediate risk. 3. Taking immediate action to mitigate risk e.g. pulling over safely. 4. Planning for repair or further action. Question 18. Upon reviewing the Exeter Road Traffic Act, a driver finds themselves needing to make a brief stop to pick up a package. The nearest available parking is a short distance away, but there is a space directly outside the shop that, while not officially designated for parking, would allow for a quick pickup without immediately blocking traffic. What is the most responsible course of action? Option A. Assume that a very brief stop in an unofficial space is acceptable as long as the engine is running and the driver remains in the vehicle. Option B. Assess whether other drivers are present, and if the unofficial space appears to cause no immediate disruption, use it. Option C. Park in the unofficial space directly outside the shop for the brief duration of the pickup. Option D. Drive to the nearest legal parking space, even if it requires a short walk to the shop. Correct answer is D. Drive to the nearest legal parking space, even if it requires a short walk to the shop. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with the overarching legal and safety obligations mandated by the Exeter Road Traffic Act. The core of the challenge lies in recognizing that a temporary, perceived benefit, avoiding a minor inconvenience, must not supersede established rules designed for public safety and order. Careful judgment is required to prioritize compliance over expediency. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and application of the Exeter Road Traffic Act's provisions regarding parking and obstruction. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law by seeking an appropriate legal parking space, even if it requires a slight detour or a brief delay. This aligns directly with the ethical duty of all road users to contribute to a safe and orderly traffic environment, as implicitly and explicitly required by traffic legislation. By choosing to find a legal parking spot, the driver upholds the principles of responsible road use and avoids potential contraventions. An incorrect approach would be to park in a manner that, while seemingly convenient, violates the spirit or letter of the Exeter Road Traffic Act. This could involve parking in a way that obstructs traffic flow or creates a hazard, even if the driver intends to be brief. Such an action demonstrates a disregard for the law and the safety of other road users, potentially leading to fines, points on a license, or even contributing to an accident. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that minor infractions are acceptable if no immediate enforcement is observed. This demonstrates a flawed understanding of legal compliance, as the absence of immediate consequences does not negate the illegality of the action. Finally, prioritizing personal time over legal parking regulations, even for a short duration, represents a failure to uphold the professional responsibility of a licensed driver to operate their vehicle in accordance with all applicable laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant legal requirements, in this case, Exeter's parking regulations. This should be followed by an assessment of the potential impact of any proposed action on public safety and traffic flow. If an action appears to contravene regulations or pose a risk, the professional should then explore alternative compliant actions, even if they are less convenient. The guiding principle should always be adherence to the law and the promotion of road safety. Question 19. When evaluating the potential impact of a recently announced road closure in Exeter on your upcoming driving test, which of the following actions best demonstrates responsible preparation and adherence to the Exeter driver's test syllabus? Option A. Focus practice exclusively on routes known to be unaffected by the closure, without considering potential examiner route choices. Option B. Assume the road closure will be resolved before your test or will not affect your planned route and proceed with your original practice routes. Option C. Rely on the driving examiner to navigate around the road closure during the test. Option D. Proactively research the road closure's duration and scope, identify alternative routes representative of Exeter's driving conditions, and practice these adjusted routes. The correct answer is D. Proactively research the road closure's duration and scope, identify alternative routes representative of Exeter's driving conditions, and practice these adjusted routes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Exeter, UK, as they are preparing for their driving test. Challenge lies in accurately assessing the impact of a recent road closure on their planned test route, and making appropriate adjustments to ensure they can demonstrate their driving skills effectively and safely within the allocated test time. This requires foresight, adaptability, and a thorough understanding of local road conditions and potential disruptions. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves proactively researching the road closure's impact on the likely test routes. This means checking official sources like the Exeter City Council website, local news outlets, or traffic update services for information on the duration and scope of the closure. Based on this research, the driver should then identify alternative routes that are representative of typical driving conditions encountered in Exeter and practice these routes. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential disruption by gathering relevant information and preparing a contingency plan. It aligns with the ethical responsibility of a learner driver to be well prepared and to avoid wasting the examiner's time due to preventable issues. Furthermore, it demonstrates a commitment to understanding and navigating the local driving environment, a key aspect of the Exeter driver's test syllabus, which emphasizes competence in varied road conditions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore the road closure, assuming it will be resolved before the test or will not significantly affect the test route. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a lack of diligence and preparedness. It risks arriving at the test center late, being unable to complete the planned route, or being forced onto unfamiliar and potentially more challenging roads under pressure, which could negatively impact performance and potentially lead to a failed test due to time constraints or inability to demonstrate required skills. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the examiner to navigate around the closure. While examiners are experienced, their primary role is to assess driving ability, not to act as a route planner for individual candidates. This approach fails to take personal responsibility for preparation and could lead to a rushed or incomplete assessment if the examiner has to make significant detours. A third incorrect approach is to practice only on routes that are known to be unaffected by the closure, without considering that the examiner might still choose a route that is impacted. This limits the driver's exposure to different road types and traffic conditions, which is a core component of the Exeter driver's test, and does not adequately prepare them for the full range of scenarios they might encounter. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a proactive and information-gathering mindset. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying potential disruptions or changes in the operating environment. 2. Actively seeking reliable information about these changes from official and reputable sources. 3. Assessing the potential impact of these changes on planned activities or routes. 4. Developing and practicing alternative plans or strategies to mitigate any negative effects. 5. maintaining flexibility and adaptability throughout the process. Question 20. The analysis reveals that a client's investment portfolio in Ontario has experienced a decline of 25% from its peak value over the past year. The client initially invested $100,000 with an objective of achieving a 7% annual return over 10 years for retirement planning. The current market value of the portfolio is $75,000. The client's risk tolerance has remained moderate. To assess the impact and determine the best course of action, what is the most appropriate calculation to perform, considering the client's original investment and objectives? Option A. Calculate the annualized rate of return required from the current portfolio value to reach the original retirement goal, factoring in the remaining time horizon. Option B. Calculate the average daily percentage change in the portfolio's value over the past year. Option C. Calculate the difference between the peak value and the current value and express it as a percentage of the peak value. Option D. Calculate the total percentage loss from the initial investment amount. The correct answer is A. Calculate the annualized rate of return required from the current portfolio value to reach the original retirement goal, factoring in the remaining time horizon. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is presented with a client's investment portfolio that has experienced a significant decline in value. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the impact of this decline on the client's financial goals and determining the most appropriate course of action, balancing the client's risk tolerance with the need to recover losses. This requires a thorough understanding of investment performance metrics and their implications within the regulatory framework governing financial advice in Ontario. The best approach involves a comprehensive recalculation of the portfolio's performance, considering both capital appreciation and income generated, and then comparing this to the client's original financial objectives and their revised risk tolerance. This method is correct because it adheres to the principles of prudent investment management and the regulatory requirements for providing suitability assessments under Ontario securities law. Specifically, it aligns with the obligation to act in the client's best interest, which necessitates a clear understanding of the client's financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance, and ensuring that any recommended course of action is suitable. This involves not just looking at the current value, but understanding the journey to that value and its relation to the client's long-term plan. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the percentage loss from the peak value without considering the time horizon or the client's original investment strategy. This fails to provide a complete picture of the investment's performance relative to its objectives and the client's capacity to absorb risk over time. Another incorrect approach is to recommend immediate liquidation of all assets to avoid further losses, without a detailed analysis of the client's financial needs, tax implications, and the potential for market recovery. This disregards the principle of diversification and long-term investment planning, potentially crystallizing losses and hindering the client's ability to achieve their financial goals. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal market sentiment or past performance of similar assets without a rigorous quantitative analysis of the specific portfolio's performance and its alignment with the client's profile is also professionally deficient. It fails to meet the standard of care expected of a financial advisor, which demands data-driven recommendations grounded in the client's individual circumstances and regulatory obligations. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured process. First, thoroughly understand the client's current financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance. Second, conduct a detailed quantitative analysis of the investment portfolio's performance using appropriate metrics and benchmarks. Third, assess the suitability of the current portfolio in light of the client's profile and market conditions. Fourth, develop and present a range of suitable recommendations, clearly outlining the potential benefits, risks, and costs associated with each. Finally, document all advice and decisions, ensuring transparency and compliance with regulatory requirements.